Good morning / good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. So today, we're kicking off a webcast series about PDM and PLM, mostly about PLM over the next few weeks. But today we're going to start with an introduction to the whole series and give you a review of PDM and PLM, discuss some of their key concepts, discuss where PDM and PLM fit in the overall product lifecycle, provide a little bit of clarity about what PLM is compared to, other acronyms you've heard like ERP or MRP or CRM, and then give you an overview of Autodesk's Vault PLM offering, which is a great way you can get both PDM and PLM all together. Again, if you've got questions as I'm going through this content, please feel free to type them into the questions pane. And I'll keep an eye on that as we go. And if something makes sense to address in context, I'll do so. Otherwise, I'll address them at the end of the presentation. But again, this is the first webcast in a series where we'll be taking a pretty deep dive into the functionality of Autodesk's PLM offering called Fusion Lifecycle. So next week, February 17th, each of these will be on a Wednesday, just like today. We'll be talking about change in quality and using PLM to manage those. The next week, February 24th, we'll be talking about bills of material. March 3rd, new product introduction. March 10th, managing supplier information. So those will be at the same times on Wednesday mornings. And if you're not sure what those various things are, new product introduction or details about supplier information, we'll be giving you an overview of those today. And then you can sign up for one or all of the coming webcasts if you've got specific interest on those specific aspects of the software. So before we get into PDM and what it is, and a lot of you are probably at least familiar to some degree with PDM. If you're using Vault, for example, or other PDM products, you may be less familiar with PLM, depending on your experience. But I'd like to take a step back from that and just talk about in general some of the things that we face day to day in our work environments. And there are lots of challenges that we have, but I think if we're talking about, large, big buckets, we could put a lot of them into three different areas. Time is maybe the biggest one these days. We never have enough of it. But beyond just not having enough time, lots of things are time-based in our environment. How long does something take? How long does it take to find a drawing that you need to work on, for example? How long does it take someone in service or production to find a drawing that they need? But even beyond that, what's the average time to market for one of our products? What's the average time to value for one of our products? So time plays a big role, and it's always a challenge, right? Quality is another big one. Our customers expect a quality product, but it's not enough just to design a quality product. We have to deliver a quality product as well. We have to make sure the processes that we follow, both in design all the way through production, lead to delivering a quality product. But even then, after we deliver the product, we need to provide quality service as well. And then, of course, cost. Time is money, right? So we waste time, it drives up cost. But also quality is expensive, and budgets are tight, right? The old, dilemma: good, fast, cheap. Pick two, right? If you want something good and fast, it's going to be expensive because you need to throw resources at it. If you're going to deliver a quality product, certain aspects of that quality are going to be expensive. Materials, for example, or just sheer amount of time it takes to do something right. But there are ways we can reduce time to then reduce cost while still delivering something at quality. So we generally will have more control over time. We can control how we spend it. We can maybe use software to help us figure out how to do things faster, more efficiently, right? So time is really where we want to look, I think, to save cost and deliver a quality product. So how do we make better use of our time? Well, you'd start maybe by thinking about the inefficiencies that you run into day to day. Increasingly, globalization is a big driver of inefficiency. Acquisitions, workforces overseas, manufacturing overseas. But even beyond that, even if you just have an office in the Midwest and you do all your manufacturing and design in one place, the last year, I think, has exposed everybody to some of the inefficiencies that come from globalization. When you've got a distributed workforce, a distributed, disconnected group of people working from home, that I'm talking with customers over the last year, that has absolutely caused inefficiencies in their processes. A big one that is caused by that is inadequate data sharing, right? There's lots of reasons we don't get the information we need, or that we can't or don't pass on information to somebody else. But making decisions, be it a design decision, a production decision, decision from management, making decisions with incomplete information is hard and it's risky. And recovering from bad decisions is a very inefficient use of time. Process bottlenecks. Everybody can think of at least one part of their process that just slows everything down. It may be people or a lack of people. It may be software or a lack of software. It could be the processes themselves. It could be inherent in the process. But a single bottleneck somewhere in an otherwise really well-designed process can just wreck everything. Lack of collaboration. This results in inadequate data sharing. And this pandemic and a lot of people working from home has absolutely highlighted, where collaboration is a problem. If you're used to relying on face-to-face communications, yelling over cue ball or walking down the hallway, if you're working from home, you can't do that anymore, right? So you turn to email, which is the worst, instant messenger, phone calls, right? It makes it difficult to collaborate if you don't have some framework in place to facilitate that. But really, all of these things boil down to one thing, which is manual effort. If we have to execute tasks manually, meaning we don't maybe have software to help us automate some of those tasks or streamline those tasks, we run into problems. We get too busy to reach out to somebody. We just plain forget because we have too much on our plate. We miss that opportunity for a face-to-face discussion, walking to the break room, where it triggers our memory and saying, oh yeah, I meant to talk to you about this. If we're not in the office, if we're not seeing people regularly, if we're too busy, if we don't have something helping us with these processes, drives up time, drives up cost. It's just lots of trouble. So, but we still have to get a product out the door, right? And in the absence of good processes and software to help, manual effort is how we get our arms around, this complex task of taking a product from somebody's idea to actually something on the customer's floor. The work's got to get done, right? From engineering drawings and how they change, to bills of material, and all of the information associated with that bill of materials. The quality aspect, who we buy things from, how we manage the inevitability of change. There are a lot of moving parts, and the right software used at the right time in the right way can help us manage all of those moving parts. So let's take a look, with all of that in mind, let's take a look at kind of a typical process of taking a product from where it starts to where it ends up. And the process you see here, you may use different words for it, but this is pretty typical. We have sales of some sort. Depending on the nature of your business, you may be driven by customer demand. It may be driven by sales or marketing. Investigating the viability of a new product. But ultimately, an idea comes from somewhere for something new. Right? Engineering then typically steps in to define that thing. They get requirements, they design to those requirements, and then they pass that along to the execution side. Pre-production or production planning, production, and then ultimately once the product is built and in a customer's hands, it needs to be serviced at times, right? And we use software for that today, in most cases, right? And a lot of acronyms down here, this sort of alphabet soup. On the sales side, we'll typically have something like a CRM, a customer resource management software to help us, manage our customer relationships. In engineering, which I'm guessing most of you are intimately related with, we have things like PDM and CAD, product data management, computer-aided design. And then on the execution side, there's obviously a ton of software. ERP, enterprise resource planning, manufacturing resource planning, manufacturing execution software. There's a lot that goes into execution. And ultimately, information does need to transfer between those systems. If we take an order, or if we've got customer requirements, we need to get those to engineering somehow. Engineering creates a bunch of drawings, right? We've got file names and drawing numbers floating around everywhere. When we get into execution, we have job numbers and routings, and there's tons of information, and there are through lines between these softwares. But oftentimes, we end up manually transferring or bringing this data from system to system. And again, we just talked about manual effort. People forget, people make mistakes. Anytime you're keying in a BOM from a drawing into an ERP system, there's going to be a mistake. Eventually you're going to get a mistake. Whether that mistake is expensive or time consuming, maybe it is, maybe you get lucky and it isn't, but they're going to happen, right? So ideally, we would have all of these systems connected in some way, so that not only does information transfer between the systems properly, but especially people making decisions, anyone who needs to make a decision or weigh in on a decision, they don't have to wonder which system do I go to or live in 3 or 4 different systems day to day. And that's where PLM comes in, right? Product Lifecycle Management. It integrates the product data, which is typically managed by our PDM systems, with our processes, how we execute not only in production, but across the product lifecycle. And it helps integrate all of these other enterprise softwares, our CRM, our PDM, our ERP, and it gives you a single place to go for information and process management and decision making. So PLM is more of a superset and a collection of information. And we're going to get more into the specifics of how that works out in software in a minute. But there can be a lot of confusion about what is PDM versus PLM. There is overlap, even in something like Vault Professional these days. We do have some PLM-like behaviors, and so it can get confusing when we're talking about these acronyms and what they are and differentiating and maybe understanding why you might need PLM if you already have PDM. So I'd like to get into more about the software we use in engineering, specifically PDM. Before we do that though, we do have a couple of poll questions. We'd like to get some feedback from you. I'd like to get a sense of the audience and what maybe experience we have with Vault. So the first poll question we have is, and this is just to get a sense. The way we've worded it here is licenses, but ultimately, how many Vault users do you have? So I'll give everyone just a minute, maybe to provide a feedback. And this, could be all engineering. It could be within. It could be, throughout your organization. But if you could just, take a quick second to let us know about how many users do you have in your Vault environment. I'll give this we're about halfway through the audience in terms of voting. And then we'll have another quick question right after this. So don't start ignoring me again just yet. So we'll give this just another second. We've got quite a few responses. We'll give it just another minute to see if anything else comes in. Okay, so we've got that one. So, let's move on to our second poll question. I'm curious about our CAD use as well. I'm also kind of curious, what the audience here is. So if you could, along with that, let us know about how many CAD users do you have. And I'm curious there too, because not everyone using CAD in an environment uses PDM. I'm also curious if we have a lot of people in the audience that are using CAD without PDM. Because if you're not using at least PDM, I'd love to talk to you because especially if you're using something like Inventor, even for a single person using Inventor in a home office, there are benefits to PDM, and we're going to get into those here in just a second. Okay, and we're just about up to the same amount of voters. We'll give this just another second, and then we will move on. Okay, great, thank you. So just looking through the responses, most of you have, between 6 and 20 Vault users. And it looks like we have a pretty similar distribution in terms of Vault and CAD use. So it looks like a lot of you are using PDM, which is great. And so some of what I'm about to talk about might be review to you. But again, I want to make sure we all understand, as well as we can, the differences between PDM and PLM. So if we were to poll all of you that are using Vault or some other PDM, in terms of like what is PDM to you, we'd come up with a lot of words. And this is like a sample of what you might get in word cloud form. There's a lot going on here. And if we were to look at the basics, right, and just filter out some of this, the big ones are concurrent design, where we need a referee when we're working on our files. We need to work on the same thing at the same time. In the absence of PDM, that's virtually impossible. It's where we store our engineering files. We do check in, check out. It gives us access control, right? We have a history of our files. It lets us track versions or revisions. It lets us get the most up-to-date information. Right? Now, when we're talking about PDM and Vault specifically, Vault does do all of these things. And if you're an existing Vault user, you're probably aware of this, but for those of you that aren't, there are different levels of Vaults. Vault Basic is the most basic, as you might guess. And if you own, say, the Product Design and Manufacturing collection from Autodesk or certain other CAD products, you already own Vault Basic, right? You may not have implemented it, but you own it. And so some of these basics, like version control, check in, check out, design reuse through copy design, access control at a basic level, and making sure you have the most up-to-date information in engineering. Vault Basic can do all of that for you today, and you already own the software. If you need more advanced behaviors, we have Vault Pro, which gets you the ability to, say, track revisions, manage your CAD BOM more effectively, and some other things we'll talk about here in a minute. So we already have add-ins, and Vault works with lots of different files and different file types. It was started by managing inventor data, and I've been with Hagerman for almost 17 years now, which seems kind of weird to say. But one of the first things I did as a Hagerman employee back 17 years ago was go and learn about this new thing called Vault. And I think that was the first commercial release of it way back in 2004. So I've been working with it more or less from the beginning, once it was available to resellers like Hagerman. And it's amazing how it's grown. And at this point, there are add-ins, dedicated add-ins for Alias and most of the AutoCAD verticals. It does some great things with factory design utilities. If you use the factory design tools in Inventor, and you're not using Vault Professional to manage some of that information, should really take a look at that. It's some really neat stuff there. Obviously, it does a fantastic job managing Inventor data. It's got integrations with Moldflow and Navisworks and Revit and our simulation products. But beyond that, Office documents. There's been an add-in for the Office products forever. Even SolidWorks and Creo. And of course, we can make PDFs, right? So there's lots that Vault does, and this is what a PDM solution should be. What we would call in-canvas interaction with your data management system, right? Bringing tools inside your design tool. So be it a flavor of AutoCAD, 3ds Max, Inventor, Civil 3D. There's some really great integration with Civil 3D involved. Revit or Navisworks, right? The idea is the PDM tool is very closely integrated with your authoring tools. And that's what PDM is. It is a tool used by authors to manage the data that they author, all these various file types. Now, beyond those basics, there are some other things that PDM would typically do, right? And some things that Vault Professional especially helps with. Better BOM management than just your CAD BOM. The ability to create a complete engineering bill of materials is what Vault Pro can help you do. Helping you meet regulations and compliance with standards organizations, right? Some basic workflows, what I call housekeeping. If you've ever heard me talk about Vault before, I use the term housekeeping with the file-based life cycles, and even to some degree the item-based life cycles, where you're really just keeping track of the fact that something has changed. It helps with collaboration, traceability. Vault Pro gets you hot backups, for example. Better management of library parts. But this is still all PDM. This is still very document-centric and product information or data-centric. Right? Now, PDM also often involves collaboration between locations. Again, if you've had to work from home anytime in the last year and you've ever had to work on documents that, say, weren't stored in Vault, especially if it was an AutoCAD file or an Inventor file, if you've had to try to open it up across a VPN, you've probably experienced some real pain there. Using a PDM system makes it easier to collaborate either down the street or around the globe, right? Because you have a central repository for this data that can then be more easily shared and managed. You can, for example, get a copy to your local computer so you can work on it effectively and quickly. And then the PDM solution, Vault in this case, makes sure whatever changes you made on your local system get put back into the central repository. In the absence of PDM, I would not want to work on Inventor data that wasn't either on my computer or right down the hall on a computer across the LAN. And Vault can extend that not to just, across town while we're working from home, but across the globe if you need to. We have lots of customers that have offices all over the world, and they use Vault to effectively share their data while staying productive. Now, beyond just the people in your organization that need to share the data, there are people outside that need to work on it, right? Customers, parts of your supply chain, your design subcontractors. Let me get out of the way there for a second. Vault Professional can facilitate that interaction through synchronization with something called Fusion Team, or more generally Fusion. If you've ever used Autodesk's cloud file hosting, like A360, I think was its first real incarnation, and that still is there. Fusion Team, or Fusion in general, when we're talking about the file sharing aspect, is a more CAD aware type of sharing, where you can actually look at a file like an Inventor file on the cloud and see relationships, track basic version history, right? But Vault can synchronize that data with the cloud automatically, so that you can still get data to your subcontractors, members of your supply chain, customers where appropriate, so that they can see that data without having to get inside your firewall, which IT is generally not going to allow, right? So you don't need to email anymore, right? But this is still PDM. We're still sharing design data, essentially, in some form. And so we can synchronize that data so that everyone involved has the latest available data when they need it. Right? And then PDM, of course, has tools to increase productivity within engineering and as part of the authoring process. So copy design is a big one. And it's probably, in my mind, the best productivity tool that Vault offers if you ever need to reuse designs. that are slightly different. Something new that Vault has added here very recently is something called duplicate search. And if you haven't looked into this and you track things by part number and you reuse a lot of data, I strongly recommend that you take a look at duplicate search. Because ultimately, creating a new part number in your environment, meaning you've got something, a widget that you draw, you need to assign a part number to it, that can be really expensive, right? According to research by the Aberdeen Group, it could be anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000 plus per new item, because you've got to get a part number, it's got to go through processes, you've got to figure out how you're going to make it, you've got to maintain it. If that widget you created is physically identical to something you've done in the past and you just can't find that other thing you did in the past and you make a new part number, you're wasting time and money, right? And at the top of all this, we talked about the big ones. Time is a big one, right? So what duplicate search can let you do is actually look in your vault and based on the geometric definition of the components, find duplicates. So we're not just talking about, oh, they had the same file name, or they started from the same inventor file. It's not as simple as that. It is legitimately a geometric search. And it lets us identify to what extent we have duplicates in our environment, right? So in general, it helps us find those things. But then we have some tools, even inside Inventor, that help us eliminate those duplicates. So be it when we open up an assembly and we say, hey, look in the vault to see, do any of these components, do they already exist with a part number? So rather than me creating a new part number for this thing I just drew, swap it out with that existing one. Right? And duplicate search, it's amazing. You run it on the parts of your vault that are relevant. You probably don't need to run it on, say, content center files if we're talking about bolts and nuts, but especially any of the things that you make, you run it on those things once. For the things that are in vault, it gets a geometric definition. When you check in files, new files get indexed as well, and then you have that at your disposal for later searching and resolution of those things. So that to me is PDM. And in the Autodesk world and the people that I deal with most often, our PDM really is, it's getting us to the definition of our product. The deliverables we would have from that would be a set of drawings, maybe some PDFs, and an engineering bill of materials. But that's only part of the process, right? If we look back at this overall process, PDM really lives in engineering. And we really need something to help us tie it together with the other parts of the process. And again, that's where PLM comes in. PLM can be all-encompassing in the process, right? Yes, today we're working on this, but where does the next idea come from? How do we vet that idea? How does it get to me on time, and how do I make sure I deliver the resulting design on time, right? How are we managing our quality processes? How do I know that what I spent so much time designing is actually getting made in the best way? How do we make sure our customers are taken care of? How do we make sure we're buying the right things we need to buy from the right places? And that if we need to switch to a different supplier, how do we vet that functional equivalent, to make sure it truly is functionally equivalent, is going to meet our needs, both from just a pure functional perspective, but also from a quality perspective. So all of these things, you're already doing that stuff today. Like I said, product still has to get out the door. So you're doing it somehow today. The question is, could you do it faster? Could it be more formal? How do you get that information from engineering and from your PDM system to the rest of the business when they need it? So that's where PLM comes in. So, this is a pretty crazy looking diagram, but these are the kind of things that, are involved in overall execution. We have a bill of materials, changes get made to those BOMs. When we're in production, maybe someone finds a problem, and ultimately that problem needs to get communicated to the right people. It needs to be evaluated, addressed. The resolution of that problem needs to get distributed to the rest of the group, right? And again, that's happening today, hopefully. Right? If you're delivering a quality product, if you're getting it out the door at all, you're doing these kind of things. But if you're doing things manually, there are bottlenecks. It could be as bad as a piece of paper sitting on somebody's desk in a stack, and they have to work their way through it, except now their desk is in their kitchen, right? So if it was paper-based, now what do you do? Right now it's all maybe emails, and maybe you've hustled to get spreadsheets in place, but that seems to be the next iteration, is a spreadsheet where you're keeping track of all of this stuff. But again, that's a document sitting on a server somewhere, and you have access control issues, and you're typing in data manually, and that spreadsheet is just one part of the larger process. How do you notify somebody that there's a new row in the spreadsheet? You can't really do that. And then, how do you know who did what and when? If you've got a spreadsheet living on the network and it's someone's responsibility for logging a problem in there, hopefully they put in their initials, but you never really know necessarily who did it if they don't fill out all of the information like they're supposed to. Now you've got a problem, but you don't know how. You have all the details. Now you have to talk to somebody, right? Manual processes, they just kill productivity, right? So if you can formalize those processes and use software, PLM software, to help you do that, you can save yourself a lot of time and trouble. And that's where Autodesk Vault PLM can come in, right? So you can make the logical transition from using Vault as PDM to an overall solution of PDM and PLM together, right? Collaboration for everyone involved in the product lifecycle. Engineering, production, even suppliers, right? Autodesk's cloud PLM solution is cloud-based, so that makes it much easier for suppliers to get in and participate if you need them to, so that you don't have to send an email to a supplier and say, hey, can you give me that information so that I can prove out your product? They can, at their leisure, when they have time, because maybe they're homeschooling their kids all day, maybe they can connect to your system, upload the data they need to, and participate in your process, right? Vault's not well suited for that. That lives inside the firewall. Fusion Lifecycle, the PLM solution, is cloud-based. It's much easier to get access to people. If you're tracking this stuff in software, you have a history of everything that happened, change orders, for example, and even a closed loop system where a problem report results in a request for a change, which is evaluated, that results in an order for a change, which then results in revision of components, and eventually notification that that change has occurred at the right time. And then once you start to collect all of this information in software, you can use it to start making decisions, right? You can report on change orders. How many do we have open? How many average closed in the last period of time? You know, how many currently open problem reports do we have? And you don't have to collect that by looking through spreadsheets or counting the pieces of paper on your desk. It can just be on a dashboard. So you call up a web page, and staring you in the face is either something red and ugly, like, oh no, we have a problem, or green, and now I know everything is good and I can go back and do something else. So overall PLM, and we're going to talk more about what PLM is and Autodesk's specific solution. But let's talk about overall what it does, right? It manages your product data in one centralized location. It helps you speed up your product development and business processes. And then it extends the value of your product data. So rather than everybody working separately in their own island of software, PLM brings those things together. And it does that out of the box, we'll say, even though software doesn't really come in boxes anymore, through this range of what I would call default functionality. Now, keep in mind that these things we're talking about and that we'll be talking about over the next few weeks, this is how Fusion Lifecycle is delivered to you with these core functionalities. But it is incredibly configurable and extendable. So if there's something you needed to do, which is kind of similar to what you see here, but a little bit different, that doesn't mean it won't fit. It is incredibly configurable. It can do any number of things. But these are the things that are most commonly needed in manufacturing environments. New product introduction, enterprise bill of materials management, above and beyond what you might do with Vault Pro, for example. Supplier collaboration, again, making sure that what you buy from people will work in your application and will not cause you problems out in the field. And change management and quality management are really tightly integrated, right? If you identify a quality issue, that typically is going to lead to some sort of change, making sure you have a closed loop system so that when a problem gets reported, it is visibly and clearly solved and captured historically, and that the people that reported the problem eventually can see and be informed that the problem was in fact resolved, and that being documented along the way, that's critical for a good quality process. So before I get into the details, some more details of what each of these things are, I have one more question for everyone. And this may seem a little bit out of left field, but ultimately this gets into the integration side of things. I wasn't quite sure where to ask this, and you may not see what you use here, but just a quick sample. We are curious if you use an ERP system or an MRP system, and most companies I talk to do have something. We're curious what you might use, and we've listed a few of the really common ones that we see there on the list, but other is probably going to be a popular choice here. But if you could just take a second and let us know what you use, because integration. So I talked about what processes the software comes with, for lack of a better term. But we typically need to integrate PLM with other business systems, and ERP is usually, or MRP, that's usually one of the big targets for integration, because PLM is ultimately gathering information from execution, right? Quality and change. And so you commonly are going to want to integrate the two. And so we just would like to know what ERP systems are in use by our audience here. So it looks like we have about the same number of votes from last time. So we'll go ahead and close this up. And let's move on to talking more about what the product does. And again, this is real high level because the idea here is it's an introduction. We'll be going more into detail about these things in the coming weeks. Now, if there's something you see here that you've got to have and you've got to know more about it tomorrow, reach out to us and we can schedule a one-on-one discussion to talk more about what it can do for you and get a sense of your needs and see if things would be a good fit. But if this is just something you're sort of investigating, we have webcasts coming up to get into more about the details of all of these. But let's start with NPI, new product introduction, right? So how you go from a concept to a delivered product. Every company does it a little bit differently, and everybody has a different term for it. New product development, R&D, there's typically a stage gate process where, certain thresholds have to be met before you get other people involved. Is there a market for it? Can we do it technically? Can we make it and make money on it? How are we going to sell it? How are we going to market it? All of those things need to happen, and there generally is a serial process there. That process can be tracked, and the element of time can be added to it, which is the big thing. Tasks that are due at a certain time, essentially managing a project. Fusion Lifecycle can help with that process. And then once that process is complete, once you've got something in production, you've got that history, right? So a year from now, if someone says, why are we making it this way? Well, we're making it that way because this is what we went through when we decided how we were going to make and sell this, right? So that history, you don't have to have, that historical knowledge in people's heads. It can be captured somewhere. Bill of materials management. This is a key component of PLM, is managing your bill of materials. And it extends beyond what you would typically manage just within engineering, right? In engineering, we're really talking about the recipe. How many bolts? What do the custom components look like? How do they fit together? But for the things we buy them from somebody. It costs a certain amount, right? When we're making something, what about this particular piece that someone is creating, what needs to be inspected? What's the process for inspecting it? How do we make sure that that inspection data is captured, and how do we react to problems that those inspections bring to light, right? If you don't have a bill of materials that you can attach all of that extra information to, it can be hard to use the system, right? In addition, when we're talking about specifically the bill of materials, you can track what a BOM looked like at a certain point in time, so you know what was built. And then you can compare bills of material as well. So if someone's not sure, okay, we made a change, but what was the impact there? You have that at your fingertips, and that kind of thing can help with compliance too. Supplier Collaboration is a fantastic tool to help you manage all of the things that you have to buy. If you buy a lot of components that go into your designs, it can be very useful if the people buying those things for you have options. But to give options, you have to vet products, you have to keep track of various suppliers, and engineering does need to have some involvement with that. So yes, while ERP is tracking specific information about the suppliers and what the quotes are you have from them and what things cost, engineering still needs to have some say, right? You can't just, a buyer can't necessarily buy what another supplier says is a functional equivalent without engineering saying, yes, this will work in the application. So if engineering isn't involved in ERP and all of that, it can be really hard to do that sort of thing. PLM can bring all of that into one place where everyone goes to know, here's what we're making, here's what we're buying, here's who we're allowed to buy it from, and here's what engineering had to say about it, and here's what purchasing had to say about it. So that integration with ERP can be critical. And then change and quality management. Again, these two are very closely linked. Avoiding bottlenecks, raising issues early, making them visible, and making sure everyone has the right information at the right time and can provide feedback when they're supposed to. And the ability through software to sort and filter and search to find the right thing at the right time so you can take action and make informed decisions. Again, I've said this a few times, this idea of a closed loop process. Someone raises an issue, that issue is tracked and worked through its eventual resolution, all through software to provide visibility, right? Ensuring quality is key. And PLM, and specifically Fusion Lifecycle, can help you do that. So again, we're going to get into more details about each of these things in the coming weeks, but just to give you a preview, right? New product introduction, bill of materials management, supplier collaboration, change management, and quality management. So we've talked about a lot today, but just to review, Autodesk Vault PLM is a combination of Autodesk Vault Professional and Autodesk's Cloud PLM solution, Fusion Lifecycle. Now, the Vault is still on-premise or behind your firewall at the very least. And it's still, PDM is still the tool you use to manage data within the organization. PLM, Fusion Lifecycle, is online. It's in the cloud. It is hosted. So it's much easier to deploy. It's also much easier to access, right? If you have a device that can render a web page, you can use Fusion Lifecycle, right? You don't have any software to deploy. It's a very intuitive UI. So, the training comes down to processes, not software, right? You don't spend 3 days learning about which buttons to push. You spend time learning about the processes. The software enables the process, right? And then beyond the things we're going to talk about over the next few weeks, not only is Fusion Lifecycle incredibly configurable, but there's also an app store with lots of apps. I think it was in the 20s the last time I looked, that add functionality to your environment. And that's all, all the functionality we've talked about today, in PLM, BOMs, new product introduction, quality, change, supplier collaboration, that's all included. Those aren't modules you have to buy. These apps in the App Store are not necessarily things you have to go and buy. They're things you can put to use just by virtue of owning the software. So we're running a little short on time. So there's some, obviously, them customer testimonials. These are available on the web too, I'm sure. But just how, things have, Fusion Lifecycle and Vault PLM have improved things for certain customers, improving documentation and version and revision control, streamlining the new product introduction process, and delivering products faster and ensuring quality. There are testimonials. You can view those on the web, and I'm sure I'll bring some of these up in future presentations as we get into the specifics, right? So just to summarize, this process we have today, we're doing it no matter what, of getting a product out the door. Using PDM and PLM together and moving from PDM to PLM and using them both can help you get things to market faster, higher quality, and at a reduced cost. So hopefully this has helped you understand a bit more about PDM and PLM and where they fit together. And in the coming weeks, we'll be talking more about the specific capabilities. And there's a registration page on our website. If you registered for this one, there's a good chance you have the link to register for the other ones as well. But I really hope you have time to join me. It's asking for a lot of time commitment. These sessions will each be a little bit shorter than this one. This one's an hour. The coming sessions will be a little shorter, but they'll all be recorded as well. So if there's one you really want to see, but you won't be able to make it, you'll be able to get access to the recording. And with that, we'll open the floor to questions. I've been keeping an eye on the questions pane as we went, and nothing came in. I hope that's a good sign that I was clear and not that everybody was bored. Yeah, we'll just have a couple more minutes here. We'll wait to see if any questions come in. And I'm not really seeing any questions. So yeah, I think then we'll go ahead and wrap it up.
Thanks, Forrest, for the presentation today, and thank you all for attending. Once again, if you could take a few moments to fill out that short survey, we would appreciate it. It will just pop up as we close down today. Also, look for an email tomorrow, which will contain a link for the recording of today's presentation. Thanks, everyone, for attending, and have a great day.
Actually, sorry, just real quick, a couple questions did come in, so I'd like to address those. The first one, I guess I didn't give enough time. So, right, the first one, how do you access the Fusion Lifecycle App Store? I believe there's a link in your tenant if you're an administrator. So I can, Andrew, I can maybe get you some more information about that. I'll make sure that you understand how to get there. Another question, if I upgrade to Vault Pro, is that essentially PLM, or is PLM a license on top of Vault Pro? Good question. So you may see some talk about Vault Pro being PLM. Vault Pro has some PLM-like functionality, but it is not PLM. So if you were to upgrade to Vault Pro, that is still just PDM, really. If you need PLM, that is an additional cost. However, right now, this Vault PLM thing that I've mostly been talking about in this session, it is a license that you can get the two together. So if you do have a need for the two together, you can buy them as a unit, and it can be incredibly cost effective. If you're interested in both Vault Pro and PLM and you don't have Vault Pro at all yet, for sure we can talk to you about that. If you already have Vault Pro, it may just be an incremental cost above what you're paying today for Vault Pro. And that incremental cost is worth every penny. So we can talk to you about that as well. And then one last question, is duplicate search only available in Vault Pro or Workgroup? Duplicate search, I believe, is Vault Pro only. It's definitely not in Vault Basic. So I believe duplicate search is only a Vault Professional capability. Okay. And sorry for the interruption there, Ashley, but I think we are done now. That was the extent of the questions.
Okay, great. Well, again, we just thank you for attending, and have a great day, everyone.
Take care, bye-bye.